Yeah, Friday and there's deadlines. Yeah, I understand how you feel.
We've been on this road to a place that
Welcome,
one day we'll
everyone.
go adventure to the other side. Searching high and low for the treasure deep in your soul. The fortune teller's always right. Got them red eyes in the night, like a panther out of sight. Gonna sing
There are
my
two
battle
hungry
cry.
people, two
Guess I
overwhelmed
am the I
people, one
am, I
people
am
is
the.
smiling, and three people are chilling, and one people is okay. So one person is focused, so everything is great, and I think we can start. So uh, today we have our first guest, and today is the second ID Power Hour. We are, yeah, I can close this poll. So we are going to do this ID Power Hour every month for an hour with different people and with different activities. And today our first guest is Tom McDowell. Thank you so much for him to join us today. And if you, I think maybe most of you recognize him. He's a e-learning influencer, and he has facilitating IDTX, and he has a YouTube channel, and also he has his own company. And today he is going to help us, how to um, learn evidence-informed approach. And I am going to, handing the mic over to him. So how do you feel today, Tom?
Oh, I was going to go somewhere between the overwhelmed and the silly. It's been one of those weeks where very overwhelmed Monday to Thursday, but it's Friday now, so everything's a Monday morning problem. It's probably not the best attitude to announce to a large group of people, but there we go. Yeah, all good. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. And then, I think we can start, and I'll also start your presentation, and here we go.
So I shall start this with saying, despite having been in the industry for like over a decade now, I still hate making slide decks, and I'm still not very good at it. So you will immediately recognize, yes, this is a stolen template from a template site, because designing slides from scratch is not something I relish. But I really wanted to kind of, when it's like, oh, what could we talk about? I feel like evidence informed practice is probably not like the sexiest title that's ever going to come along in an L&D talk. It's probably not the most exciting thing you're even going to talk about this afternoon, but I do think it's really important in our industry that we talk about it more. I'm actually going to skip the second slide because it's a this is Tom slide. We already did that bit. So that's Tom. This is Tom. Anything you ever see that looks roughly like this, just assume it's called Tom. L&D is not taken seriously. As SpongeBob would say, why? GIF's not playing. That's sad. He should be like, there should be lightning, and he should be screaming why. But that's okay. This is a question that I feel like everyone has asked at some point, and certainly in my career, I've worked in-house as an external contractor and supplier, vendor side, and the same issue comes up. L&D is just not taken seriously by all of the business, some of the business, the C-suite, the financial side of the business. And I think we spend a lot of time internally and amongst ourselves asking, why is that? And more often than not, when I have the discussion with people, the place we start is I'm right and everyone else is wrong. L&D is the golden child. We know what we're talking about, and the business just doesn't get it. Whenever you start saying they just don't get me, remember, say that in like a teenage voice. Oh, you just don't get me, mom. And you immediately start to think, is that the case? Or perhaps are we the bad guys? This is the end of the joke slides. Everything else is properly put together. I just couldn't resist putting a Star Wars thing in. It's me. But yes, we may not have a Death Star to return to, but we should probably default to, are we the reason? Maybe not us personally, but the history of L&D. maybe our current practices. Maybe we are the reason that we are not taken that seriously in a lot of organizations or by a lot of other professional groups. And I use the term professional groups there. We're going to talk about that a lot in this session. And later on, there's a breakout. And one of the things I want you to consider in that breakout is, do you consider learning and development to be a professionalized industry? Do you consider us to be professionalized? And we'll talk about maybe what that means in more specifics as we go through. And feel free to discuss and share your thoughts in the chat as well. This session is very relaxed, so I'd love your input throughout. If you disagree with me, shout at me. Let's have an argument. That's going to be fun on a Friday. They're always that is always the most fun. If I say something you disagree with, do speak up, because that's an important part of this whole conversation, in fact. So maybe we're the bad guys, and here are 4 really quick and easy to mention ways in which we have been the bad guys. We did the learning styles thing. We brought in the left and right brain nonsense. We pushed multiple intelligences, and we're the ones that made businesses spend loads of money on psychometric analysis. So if, as I like to do, you think about our relationship with the organizations in which we work as like social currency, we've got some debt to pay off. Whenever I talk about social currency, for those who don't or aren't familiar with the metaphor, we're talking about the idea that your social accounts, your relationships, can be somewhat considered like a bank account. Are you in credit? Do you have money in the bank? Do people perceive you as helpful, useful, willing to muck in and people they want to have a relationship with? Or are you in debt? Are you a drag on the ticket? Are you the one holding projects back, slowing things down, or being unhelpful to others? It's really important, I think, to think about that when we think about that professional groups element. Because some professional groups, it's very easy to sort of go, oh, yes, they're very professional. The accounts team. Well, to be an accountant, you need qualifications. To be a good accountant, you need to deliver accounts on time, correctly, not get fines, not get sued, keep the business in the green. All these really good things, very measurable, very expected. And everyone knows if you say, I'm an accountant, everyone goes, oh, you're an accountant. I don't particularly want to have a conversation with you unless my taxes are due, but you're an accountant. I know what you do. We always joke about the whole, I'm an instructional designer. Now let me explain what that means to you. But that's kind of a problem. That might indicate that we're not that professionalized because no one else understands what it is that we bring to the party. And that gives us a problem in terms of our currency with other departments. How can they perceive us as helpful team players and on side if they don't actually understand what it is that we do? More importantly, whenever we say, okay, let's define what an instructional designer does, can the industry decide? Can we define ourselves? What does an instructional designer do? History would suggest we might struggle. Um, so, enter evidence-informed practice. So I'd be really keen just to get a baseline now, just in the chat. Are you familiar with the term or the concept of evidence-informed practice? And just while people are dropping stuff in, I'll just have a quick look. So there's some interesting comments coming in. Just had a chat yesterday about a conversation where multiple people agreed they struggle to describe their jobs to friends and family. Yeah. Brilliant. Oh, brilliant. Lots of yeses to some extent. Excellent.
There are many people who know. But
Never use it professionally. Not sure. That's cool. Awesome. Well, the first thing to say is I'm not, evidence-informed practice is nothing new. L&D certainly hasn't created it. I certainly can take no credit for it. I'm just the messenger. And I only became a messenger for it really in this context because it really helped me turn around my career. So I became a bit I don't want to say preachy about it, but I'm certainly very, very passionate about it. So let's dive in and kind of look at a little bit of what it means. I'm not going to do like loads of complex slides and complex diagrams. this is much more of a conversation piece. So do jump into the chat. Let's have some back and forth throughout this next bit. Oh, I've clicked the wrong button. That's the one I was looking for. So ultimately, evidence informed practice is nothing that complicated. It's really three things, and it's a bit of a balancing act. There's no exact answer, and you'll notice there's no pyramid with like percentages in it. We're getting to percentages, pyramids, and diagrams like that. We'll talk about that. But the first thing is, I feel like often when we talk about evidence informed practice, we disregard one of the most important parts of it in doing so, our own experience. Whether you whether you're LXD, ID, developer, whatever it might be, your professional experience is not without value. And I feel like sometimes whenever we talk about evidence, we do devalue experience. Now, I think it is important to remember that your experience is exactly that, your experience, but that doesn't rob it of value. Your experience is full of context that perhaps some of these other groups will not have. The organizations in which you work, the regions in which you work, the people that you have worked with. None of that can be captured in any other way than you doing it and holding on to that experience. Um, for that reason, we're not actually going to talk too much about point one today because I kind of can't tell you how to do your experience. You have to figure that one out and gain it. But the one thing I would suggest to really add value to that is document it. You don't need to keep like a daily diary, um, but do, when you come across something or reflect on something, document it for yourself and for others. Throughout this sort of session, I want us to consider the idea of within our organizations or our teams having a black book. And in that black book, we document kind of our best practices, our way of doing things, not just the way we want to do things, but the way we can actually prove works. So when you try something and it goes disastrously wrong, and we've totally all done that and we'll all do it again, um, document it in your black book. What went wrong and why? Your experience really, really matters. It's not the lesser part of this triad of considerations. Number two is high quality research and evidence. This is probably the element that our industry has historically been a very light touch with. This is kind of the section that, because it was maybe a little weak, learning styles crept in and left and right brain crept. Because the disproving research or the lack of evidence at the very start for all those things has always been there. And so when we kind of say, hang on, if something's been disproved for 20, 30 years, why are we still talking about it? The answer sits in section two. We are not directly enough connected with that hard research, that high quality research and evidence. And part of that is that the industry is very shaped by vendors. Having worked vendor side, I know this to be the case. White papers are a prime example of this. White papers are often held up as ways to shape your way forward or decide what makes for an effective learning experience. But you kind of have to remember that white papers written by an LXP provider are marketing material. They are not high quality research papers. They are marketing materials. It's going to be a very brave business that publishes something that says our product doesn't work. No, they are going to publish something that shows them in the best possible light. Now, they don't always make stuff up. Some definitely do. But they're never going to give you the full truth. You'll notice there's never a lot of context. There's never a lot of this is the limitation of the study discussion. Just in the chat, how often or how regularly or how recently has someone gone to a kind of research-driven platform, whether it's Journ or Pearson or something like that, or Google Scholar is a great one as well, and really got down to the hard evidence, like a research paper. Whether you read the whole thing is irrelevant. Getting there is sometimes enough. So how regularly or how often do people do that? And it's fine to say I've never had, because that was like the first 3 years of my career was me going, yep, Ben, I'm on board with you there. Absolutely. That's really interesting. Sorry, my screen's a bit small. Clemmy does it regularly, but provides for higher education, and I think there's an interesting split in the space there between corporate and higher ed, where maybe there's a bit more of a focus. Currently studying for CIPD, so you started doing it. Awesome. Part of diploma, doing it. Brilliant. Uni studies, but almost never, maybe twice. Fair enough. During studies, yes, but not so much anymore. As an again, yeah, education, brilliant. It's good to see that split there. I sometimes stumble there from Google searches. I feel that when you just want a website and it goes, here's a 40-page research paper, and you're like, that's really helpful, but I'm not reading that. As a working professional, used to do so as a uni student. Yeah, I feel that, Peggy, absolutely. So I guess the first thing to say is that I think the responses there in the chat are pretty typical of how most of us feel about it. I don't think any of us are saying, I don't want to go and do that. But let's face it, research papers are boring to read. And they're not written to be page-turning novels. You know, none of them are going after Booker prizes. They are presenting findings. They're not exciting, and they can take a while to read and reread, and check on references and all that kind of thing to really go through them. So it's not always going to be possible to do that. But if you can, for very core decisions, look to them. If you can set aside a little bit of time. And with regards to that, there are tools to help us. There are tools such as the Learning Scientist magazine, which is a free online publication, and the fantastic Learning Science Weekly. So Learning Science Weekly, if you're not familiar with it, is actually provided by Intelum, who do have an LXP and an authoring tool to sell, but their Learning Science Weekly emails and site have proven to be pretty good, actually, at kind of keeping that away from the conversation. And what they tend to do is look at 2 or 3 pieces of research in each episode and break it down to, here's the full research, here's an overview, and here are your key takeaways. And the people running that are research professionals. They're not lay people having a go. So you kind of have some solid backing there. So there are loads of tools like that. Repeat the names, yes. So you've got the Learning Scientist magazine. That's released quarterly as a free PDF download. That is, I would say, that is more on the experience to evidence side, and about sort of implementation. And then you have Learning Science Weekly by Intelum. That is, as it suggests, a weekly email you can sign up to. But they also, if you sign up to that, you also get access to their platform where all the backlog are available right back to issue 1. I think they're on issue 200 and some odd these days. So there's not only is there going forward great stuff there, but you have access to this tremendous backlog as well, that is really, really valuable. They also had a podcast where they have people on, some practitioners, but also some theorists and researchers, to give you an insight there. So there are platforms like that out there that can give you like 90% of the value without having to go to the research papers. That said, I would really encourage you, if you've come across something and you're considering it and it's important, prioritize getting to the real meat behind what you're looking at. Prioritize really digging into that paper. You don't need to read 7 if you can go, this is the important bit, I'm going to read that. We're going to talk more about that whole section in a minute, but section 3 is user input. We often think being professional means we need to make every decision and that we know best. And sometimes we do. And we must always remember that 90% of users are idiots. No, that's not strictly true, but we always kind of have to design with that in mind. If they can click the wrong thing, they'll click the wrong thing. If they can misinterpret an instruction, they'll misinterpret an instruction. And if they think they know how they learn best, they definitely don't know how they learn best. This is, regularly proven to us again and again. That does not, however, mean that their input is not valuable. In fact, their input is just as valuable as your experience and just as valuable as research, because any good research will acknowledge the same thing that you have to acknowledge about your personal experience: limitation. And sometimes we're breaking new ground. Sometimes we're doing something for the very first time, but the user isn't. The user has done this every day for the last 30 years. So perhaps they do have some insight for us. And this is really where we can start looking at the world of product. And I speak a lot about product mindset in L&D, and that's really where that ties in. And I'm going to talk more about that in just a moment. But I want to loop back to point 2. I said we weren't going to spend too much time on point 1. Your experience is yours. Document it, share it, talk about it, come and do things like this. Share experience. It's fantastic. But high quality research and evidence. Identifying high quality research and evidence is not, unfortunately, as easy as go to Google Scholar and everything there is top notch. We have, I think, a bit of a challenge. Maybe those who work in education or have gone through the higher education system maybe have a little bit of a leg up here, and you kind of already know this. But information literacy is a challenge in the world. Identifying what is good information and what is not good, what is reliable and what is not. So for that, I developed, I call it the sniff test in my organization, but everyone has different names for it. The flip and reverse is what Miriam Neeling calls it. There's loads of different names for it, but it's basically 4 really simple steps that you want to do if you're considering changing a practice or adopting something new based on research. And the first thing to remember is one research paper does not make a theory. When we're talking about applying real evidence-based practice, no one piece of information should cause you to drastically change course. Unless that information is, sorry, you've been made redundant, you need to find a new job. Then you want to tack pretty quick. But other than that, everything should be looked at as part of the whole. No one thing should drive an immediate change of course. So the first thing to look at when you're considering anything is the language being used. What is the research title? Is it a hype piece? Are they using a lot of emotive language? Are they attempting to cause moral panic? Moral panic is an interesting one right now with the rise of AI and undoubtedly the fall of mankind to a kind of pet species over time. But when you look at a lot of the pieces that are out there right now that people, this is reshaping how we look at L&D, this is reshaping how we work in the workplace, there's a lot of very emotive language. There's a lot of titles like, what, this will replace you in 10 years' time, moral panic, emotional language. This is not a piece to be trusted implicitly. There are a lot of red flags there. Whereas a longitudinal study on the long-term impacts of AI on the career prospects of people under 35 is a very non-emotional, very non-panicky title. You cannot obviously rely on just the title. This rule needs to be applied to the whole body of text. But whenever you're reading anything, it's really good to be asking yourself what kind of language is being used here. Is this precise, evidence-based language, or is this emotional, panicky language? Second point is the source. Who wrote it and why? Is this, in fact, marketing disguising itself as research? Is this true academic research? Is this corporate funded research? And that's always interesting. There are businesses out there that conduct real research, but use it to market their product. And that's sometimes some of the trickiest stuff to work with, because at that point, you kind of have to dig past their findings and get to the data and do your own analysis of what they found. I would always suggest that whenever there's a corporate sponsor or a corporation involved in the research don't take what they say the findings are to be as written. They should, if it's a proper piece of research, be making the data available to you. And so you should be able to go in and take a look at yourself. But even then, even if you want to take something from a white paper and use it, doesn't make it inherently bad. Like, I'm not going to say companies have got your best interest at heart. They're trying to make as much money as they can. That's why companies exist. But it doesn't make everything they write untrue. The important thing is to know where this information comes from. There's no one, right way or one right source. It's just about how much stock you place in that bit of information being 100% true, which not everything needs to be. Especially when it comes to applying it in a different context anyway. Second up, numbers. Do the numbers add up? Are they, or are their findings in line with the data they are presenting? And is the data they're presenting wildly out of alignment with other similar research? So if you've got 10 studies on the same topic and all of them are saying, there's a 3 to 4% improvement if you do this over that, and then this white paper comes out and says there's a 60% improvement, that should immediately be a red flag. Now, they may have genuinely stumbled across some weird edge case, but we definitely need to read more because that is so far out of alignment with everything else we're seeing. And finally, it's time to make some choices. So just because you found some research, just because it's interesting, just because it challenges what you do now, does not necessarily mean you should make a change today. Doesn't even necessarily mean you should make a change at all. Context, as always, is king. And this is the difference between being evidence informed and evidence driven. If we adopted an evidence driven approach, we would say, well, the research says this, so we shall do exactly that. And that is very dangerous because that ignores our experience, our users' input, and the situation in which we're working. You are very unlikely to find a large body of research that tells you exactly how to create effective training in your work environment. You might, weirdly, if you work in the higher education or the school space, have better luck with that, because that is where a lot of learning-based research has been targeted. But especially for those of us working in the kind of corporate setting, the evidence is a bit more spotty, and a lot of it is corporate funded or white paper driven and all these sorts of things. So it's really important to remember that the decision is still yours about what your practice looks like. Just because the evidence says one thing does not mean you should always do it. Music is a phenomenal example of this. It's pretty consistently found in research that background music is not, it either makes no difference or slightly increases the cognitive load required from the learner. Not a good thing in most scenarios. The flip side of that is one of the most effective trainings I ever deployed was music. It was a series of comedy songs about fire safety processes. You can't, research is never going to tell you, yes, that's the right solution for this. There's never going to be a paper that says, this is when you should write a comedy song on a banjo about using a fire extinguisher. No, there is no researcher in the world working on that right now. I wish there was. That would be an amazing job. But it's not out there. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. It doesn't mean we shouldn't try exciting new things. It just means that we should consider when we are and aren't aligned with research. When we do have that underpinning, we should be saying to the business that here's the underpinning. We're not willing to do something that we know is actively bad. But sometimes we should be willing to say, hey, look, I think there's an opportunity here. Podcasting is an interesting one right now. There's not a wealth of evidence to support it's going to be super effective, but based on user interviews, my experience, whatever it might be, I think it's worth giving a go. Let's do a trial. Kind of create your own internal research in that sense. Maybe you don't publish it, maybe you don't share it outside your business for whatever reason, doesn't mean you can't put that in the black book under we did some internal research and yes, this works, or no, it doesn't work, or here are the limitations. So I guess that's the final point on that one, is where there is no research that you can find, do it yourself. Doesn't need to be a massive study, doesn't need to be written up, doesn't need to be published. Research conducted in your organization, when conducted well, is just as valuable. That's kind of as much as I was going to cover in that area. Does anyone have any questions, though, about that they want to drop in the chat quickly before I jump into step 3?
There's a one comment.
How often do you update your black book? Constantly. It's very rare that I go a couple of days without putting something in there. So, I mean, I guess the challenge is, as someone who's external, I now have many black books. I have black books for many clients, and I have my own personal one. My personal one moved on to Miro a long time ago because the actual pile of paper was getting unmanageable. But I would genuinely suggest go to it regularly. Make it work for you. What do you use for a black book? Oh, Miro. There we go. I use Miro for my personal one. I use Figma for another client who's a Figma-based organization. As I said, my one originally was a black book, which is why I refer to it as a black book. That's probably the worst decision I made, was putting it on paper. I love working on paper, but something that like you plan to re-edit constantly over like a decade is not really a sort of prime paper opportunity. What kind of things have I written in it? So, I mean, well, from today's session, I'm not sure I would add anything because predominantly thus far it's me unto you. Maybe that will change when we hear back from you after these groups. So, you know, for me, my black book, the kind of things I would put in it might be, I find a research paper that's interesting. I would put a link in there, or a direct PDF file if I've got the PDF file and have the rights to it. I would put my notes in there. I would perhaps highlight any questions I've got, any points of further research I want to do. That might lead me to drag more things in there. A lot of URLs are in there to websites. Got to watch out for that, especially over time. They can obviously go bad. So you've got to end up using the way back when machine a lot, which hopefully sticks around. So yeah, I mean, genuinely just anything I figure out or find, or, you know, interesting things people tell me. There's an interesting idea. It's Neil Gaiman's idea of writing dialogue called the compost bin. And that is anything anyone tells you that you think is just vaguely interesting or is a nice use of language, write it on a scrap of paper and put it in your compost bin. It's a little tin in your office when you're writing dialogue. I basically do the same thing for L&D. If I ever hear someone say something interesting, I will try and take some notes and put it in my black book, and then figure out how that relates, how that maps to everything else that's in there. Notion, yep, Ben, fantastic example. Notion's a brilliant tool for that. It's a bit newfangled and smart for me. I struggle with Notion, too many things going on. Let's dive into the next bit. We're nearly done with the slides because I'm aware we're running over that particular part of the time. But I wanted to touch on the user input piece because this is something that I'm hyper passionate about. Largely because I think we do a weird job with user input. We quite often run workshops and surface level stuff like that, but we kind of ignore the fact that there are a couple of industries that are really, really good at this stuff. Marketing is good at it. Product is great at it. You want to see who can make users really share their thoughts in a meaningful way? Look at tech companies. It's terrifying how good they are at giving us products that we're like, oh, this is amazing. This solves so many of my problems that I didn't even know I had. Granted, some of that is through somewhat nefarious means, and we're not going to promote that. We're not going to go, right, let's all go data mining in our organizations, but there's some simple things that we can learn. The first thing is focus groups and surveys. Don't underestimate the value of a focus group or a survey. Usually, focus groups and surveys are poorly run and poorly written, largely because we end up with too many fingers into it. We try and ask too much. We try and cover too much ground. We try and go, oh, if we're sending a survey out, let's chuck some questions in from that team. Oh, and the business wants us to ask that. And suddenly you've got 50 or 60 1 to 5 questions and no real value. And only 30% of the workforce is willing to give you the time to complete it. Keep them short, keep them specific, and don't survey everyone. It's fine to choose who you survey so long as you acknowledge the inherent issues in what you're doing. So, first of all, there's the obvious issue of bias. You need to consider that. But if you're only looking to roll out a solution to the contact center, just survey the contact center, or just survey a specific percentage of the contact center. Select at random if needs be, or X many people per team, or persona based selection works really well as well. It doesn't have to be big, long, or tedious. It just needs to give you some level of insight. I've for some reason numbered this 1, 3, and 2. That'll go in my black book. Tom should proofread his slides. 3 then, it should be 2, user observation and testing. Now, this is something I think we very rarely do, but we could do with doing. How often do you observe your people doing the things that you have asked them to do? If you have, let us know in the chat. But this is something that in the tech world is very commonplace. Here's our new user interface. I'd like you to try and create a piece of content or post something new on the site, and just watch them try and do it. It's incredible the things that you learn watching people try and do things that you've asked them to do, whether that's in a piece of e-learning, whether that's during a workshop, or whether that's just on the job. If you've just trained a massive number of people on a new system, take some time to observe them using the system. Do they actually know everything that you train them on? Are they being able to put things into place? Are they struggling? Can you act as a consultant to the business and say, hey, actually, the software's the problem here, not the training? Or actually, our training's the problem. Sorry, we'll fix that. Observations are really, really key. Marketing for Learning have some great resources. Yeah, absolutely. Their user research stuff is fantastic. And actually, the point number 2, stroke 3, actually comes into this quite well, which is card sorting. I'm not sure if anyone's ever done a card sorting exercise with an audience before, but the idea here is we spend a lot of time as instructional designers, LXDs, teachers, on information architecture. Where does each piece of information go in this particular experience? How do we group things together, and what things are actually related to each other? More often than not, end users with a lot of experience doing the job, or people learning a topic, are really good at connecting information you don't think is related in a way that helps them better learn. And this relates back to the old principle of providing a broad concept before giving people details to try and file within that concept. Well, card sorting really just allows you to say, hey, here's all the pieces of information on literal post-it notes, perhaps, or little cards. My office is full of post-it notes and index cards from this exact thing, putting them in front of a group of users and asking them to group them. What goes together and why? What's that grouping called? Why have you called it that? Does that grouping relate to any of the other groups that you've created? And what is that link? Again, it's amazing what you'll discover. I always use the example when I was working at Thames Water. We did a similar exercise to this, and we realized there were connections between parts of the business we didn't even know existed. I learned about a team that just checked pipes through audio. They walk along the street with big sticks with ear cups on them, listening for leaks on the ground. Who knew that was a job? All of a sudden, this came up in an induction because there was one bloke, that was what he was here to do. And he's like, there is no training for me. I'm just told to listen for leaks. Without that card sorting session, we would never have got through, here's a grouping about operations, and him going, there's a card missing. What do you mean there's a card missing? Well, my job isn't here. Nothing here is here for me. Those exercises are fantastic. They also take a lot of pressure off the training team needing to be experts in every topic they train. SMEs are fantastic, but they're often very restrictive in their view. users usually have a much broader view of the workplace and are able to make those connections for us. So really what that all boils down to is the product mindset. And I've put a lot of stuff about product mindset before, so I'm not going to bore you all too much with it. But the three things that I would definitely say are worth thinking about in this section are defining problem statements before you try and create learning objectives. Start by defining the problem the user is actually facing and the impact that problem has. Not only will that help you define better learning objectives and direct your efforts better, it will also highlight when training is really not the solution and give you a much clearer idea of where you can direct that. So often when training's not the solution, we kind of go, well, hands off, our job's done. We said it's not our problem. Well, think about your social currency. What you've just done is go, no, I'm not helping. Whereas instead you could say, okay, so we've had a look at the problem. We've defined it as this. The solution is actually a software change. The solution is actually coaching. The solution is actually, this isn't a problem. This person's just whining. Try and avoid the third one. You then are a consultant to the business. You are still adding value, even when you're saying, hey, no, we can't fix this problem for you. Prototype and iterate. This is being spoken more and more about, but I think we still have a long way to go. Paper prototyping is a fantastic way, especially if you're designing e-learning. Paper prototyping is fantastic. Draw out basic user interfaces literally on paper or using wireframes in Figma, put it in front of real people and watch them say, I don't get it. What am I supposed to click? What are you asking me to do here? Suddenly you will realize UI design is incredibly complicated. But more importantly, they will tell you when things are just a bad idea very early on before you've put any effort into what color they're going to be, before you've opened Storyline or Evolve or whatever. Same with low fidelity and high fidelity prototypes. You never want to be sending stuff to an SME for review at, final full fidelity stage. That's just painful when they want to change stuff. So make sure you're making use of those lo-fi and hi-fi prototypes. And finally, back to what I said before, build the black book. UX and UI playbooks are super common. They're available all over the internet. People are always giving them away free. The unspoken truth is everyone that's out there is perfect for the organization in which it was created and will not perfectly align to your organization. So unfortunately, you've got to make your own. Bad luck. But that's where the black book comes in. Put all this stuff in your black book. Every card sorting session, every prototyping session, every observation session, put your notes in your black book. They are invaluable. So this is where I'd like to give you the opportunity to chat amongst yourselves, do a breakout session for 10 minutes. Does that work?
Yeah, I think that 10 minutes will be great.
Perfect. And like I said before, are we professionalized? What will you try and change? What will you do to gather evidence? And how will you include user inputs moving forwards? And it's okay to say you won't, this was a waste of my time and Tom should never come back. That's perfectly reasonable too.
Yeah, let me start with the discussion rooms. Oh, great. Everyone is smiling at the moment.
A lot to learning.
10 minutes of not listening to me will make anyone smile. See?
Is there anyone who wants to talk and share with us what happened during these breakout rooms?
Sure, I can share what we talked about. We just kind of ended up talking a little about onboarding because it's oftentimes a very complex issue, and pretty much everyone suddenly agreed that they had struggled with onboarding programs, but the issues were never obvious. We always had to dive deeper, doing some kind of user research and really like trying to find the actual issue. For example, managers not assigning enough time to people for their onboarding program, even though the program itself people were happy with, or facilitators not really being on board with it or not having enough time and so on. So like the onboarding program itself was fine, but the issues were somewhere else. But even then, maybe a stakeholder came to us as L&Ds and said, hey, make our onboarding program better, even though it's something else we have to do here.
And those conversations are where this can really come into its own, because it's sometimes very difficult to push back and go, no, you're the problem, without sounding exactly like that. Whereas if you can do this research, this evidence gathering in the background, you can be a bit more confident in saying, hey, here's the actual problem. So that's awesome. Great conversation.
You can share your ideas, but if you want, we can also move on.
Actually, if I may, I wanted to ask a question to Thomas, because I think one of the things that stuck with me the most was this differentiation between evidence-informed and evidence-driven. And let's say when it's time to okay, you have done, let's say, the desk research, what is research in academia saying, you have also consulted your users, and based on these two pieces of evidence, that's how you are going to design a plan, make suggestions, that's gonna guide the way forward. If you're departing from that point, would you call it evidence informed or evidence driven?
If you're gonna, it's always tricky. So if you're departing from I guess there's departing from the known, and there's doing something that goes against the known. So if you're departing from the known, I think you can definitely still be evidence informed, because you can still say, well, okay, just because we're doing something that we don't know is definitely going to work or has a high chance working or is based on evidence, doesn't mean we can't still think about other evidence that we know. We still have baselines, right? We understand to an extent cognitive load. We understand again, to an extent, the cognitive process of learning. We understand encoding, all these sorts of things. So we can still have some evidence-informed decision-making within what we're doing. The moment you say, all the evidence says this is a terrible idea, but we're going to do it anyway because I think it's cool, that's when you kind of can no longer say you're evidence-informed, because the evidence informed you, this is a stupid idea, don't do it. And you've gone, well, I'm feeling it, and you go for it. That's not to say sometimes that don't work. There have been a few edge cases where, for some bizarre reason, something that should not have worked does. But yeah, it is difficult to always know which one you're in, and I don't think it's overly important to be super strict about labeling this is driven versus this is informed. It's just that awareness of driven can be dangerous purely because it strips away context. It says the research says this, so that's all we ever do. That is not a pathway that includes a lot of innovation. Being evidence driven is perhaps the reason some areas, certainly in the UK, of the education system have not moved forward since I was at school. I see kids today being taught some subjects exactly the same way I was taught it. It was bad then and it's bad now, but it's evidence driven. And because no one's come up with something better and gathered evidence for it, it hasn't changed. That kills innovation and is damaging from a learning perspective, in my view. I hope that kind of answers your question. It might not have. I might just have waffled on.
Yeah,
If so,
absolutely. It does help. So thank you very much for that.
On that note, actually, I would say there is a much better source of information for all of this than me, which this wasn't deliberately placed, but Miriam Nealon and Paul Kirshner literally wrote the book on evidence-informed learning design. I would highly recommend it. It's a big old book. It's not like an afternoon read, but there are pictures, and that makes me very happy, like line diagrams and stuff and charts and tables. But it literally takes you from, what is this, through to how to implement it, what it looks like for digital versus face-to-face versus lots of other things. They also run a blog called the Three-Star Learning Design, another fantastic resource.
Yes.
Much more informed and well-read than I am, so well worth a look.
Thank you so much. By the way, we have another question, I guess. Henny, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you so much, Thomas. It has been very informative. Great to also follow your thought pattern into the journey that you take to design. So to ask about like the research part, okay? So if you are trying this approach that is not really, it's evidence backed, but in another context, and you're trying to switch it to the learning context of XYZ, and you don't have those first adopters, where would you try to build a pool or find a pool that already exists to test those theories with, and then generate that evidence to go out and say, like, yeah, we have some factual information that we can actually build on top of that and gain the
Yes.
momentum?
Yeah, so that, I mean, that's always tricky. I've done it two different ways, one with more success than the other, but I wish it was the other way around. So the way that I have found success doing it is there are people in every organization that love the L&D team. We've all met these people. You put something on the LMS, they do it the next day, and you get an email going, "This was awesome. Thank you. More, please." And equally, you have the people who don't want to say they hate the L&D team, but they hate doing what the L&D team asks them to do. Weirdly, it's the people that I'm going to say they hate L&D, even though it's not strictly true. The people who hate L&D are probably the group you want involved most of all, because they are the people that are far more likely to rip you down than tell you you're awesome. And when doing research, that's more useful, because you want to be able to rely on any feedback you get being honest and not based on, oh, we're friends, so I don't want to tell you that your work's terrible. Getting a mix of the two is usually best practice, but 9 times out of 10, those that don't like L&D fundamentally will refuse to be involved, or their managers won't really feel like giving the time up. The approach is always, though, sell it to the business, sell the value to the business. We want to try this out. We're not sure. There's a risk attached to doing it big and getting it wrong. So let's do a pilot. Let's do some testing. But always try and find value to the business there. So it's still training. We're still going to help these people get better at their jobs, but we want to run a pilot. I tend to find in organizations, calling it a pilot will go down better than saying we want to conduct some research. Research sounds like a waste of time and money, stuffy, and you being difficult. Pilot sounds like exciting, new innovation in the business. If you can fit like AI in the title of it or something, they'll definitely sign it off. But yeah, pilot is usually the right language to be using. And then really outline to those people involved that you want them to be honest, brutally honest. If it doesn't work, you need to know. If they don't like it, you need to know. If they find you the wrong person to deliver it, you need to know. Getting people past that I want to be nice in work thing and getting them to be brutally honest with you is really important. But it's usually not too difficult. People quite like doing that once they get started. Once they get over that initial uncomfortableness, it's amazing how much people like to tell you you're wrong. As we all know, so it's yeah, the business is usually the biggest roadblock, but pilot versus research is usually the approach there.
Is there any other question? I think we can also answer one more question, maybe one last question.
If anything comes to mind, you can always drop me a message. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn or on Slack.
Okay, then thank you so much, everyone. But just before I close today, I want to ask you, like, how would you describe today with one word?
Can that one word be Friday?
Yeah. You could put it on this poll.
We've been on this road to a place that one day we'll know. Adventure to the other side. Searching high and low for the treasure deep in your soul. The fortune teller's always right. Got them red eyes.
So thank you so much everyone, and thanks so much to Tom for coming and joining us today. I hope you have a great Friday and great weekend, and see you next month for another ID Power Hour. Take care, everyone.